This is the Focus on Parliament show on Civic Space TV, brought to you by the Center for Constitutional Governance. I am Kwagala, your host. Founded in 1962 as an independent third force to challenge the hegemonic duopoly of the then Cold War era politics of the two superpowers, that is the USA and the Soviet Union. The non-aligned movement converges here in Kampala to evaluate its mandate and progress that it's made over the decades. Now, we understand that the heads of state are in a summit that is culminating in a few days from today. On today's program, we want to evaluate the significance and continued relevance of this organization, if any, and whether the summit has any tangible benefits for the Ugandan citizen amid a very turbulent global landscape that is punctuated by a political military conflict in the Middle East and also the grim reality of shifting political alliances at the international level. Joining me to discuss the substance of today's topic is a panel of very esteemed young people, but discussing very serious national matters, who I now have the pleasure and honor to introduce to you, our dear audience, starting with Mr. Lawel Muhwezi.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Uganda. I'm happy to be back. Happy New Year to our viewers. I don't know if I no longer feel confident describing myself as a young person. Someone reminded me that people my age in other countries and continents are above young. They are doing amazing stuff. I feel that the description of young makes us think we have a lot of time and we are not as responsible and dutiful to our country and the world. But thank you.
Are we short on time?
Yeah.
Good to have you, Lawel. Next is the lady, the only lady on the show. It's a pleasure to have you, Mercy Awino. It's a pleasure to have you, Mercy.
Thank you, Isaac, and thank you to everyone that is here. Good morning to Uganda. As introduced, my name is Mercy Awino, and unlike Lawel, I identify as a very young person, young and energetic, and absolutely well placed to contribute to the matters of this nation, to discuss like we're doing here, and I look forward to the fruitful discussion that we're going to have.
Thank you, Mercy. Yes, the gentleman right next to Mercy is Mr. Kwantampora, Brideger.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. By names of Kwantampora, Brideger, Kamugisha, and absolutely very happy to be part of this show. And the viewers and the listeners who are watching, we are glad indeed to give you a package that we have prepared for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brideger. Lawel, let us begin from the point of painting a historical perspective of the non-aligned movement. The group of countries that is only, I think, in terms of their numerical strength, only second to the United Nations. What is it that motivated these countries to come together and to achieve what in particular?
So first of all, I wish to give a disclaimer that while coming here, I wanted to be a representative of the many Ugandans who don't understand clearly what the alignment movement is about. And because, okay, let's just go back. It's starting. My understanding is that the non-alignment movement starts during the Korean War between South Korea and North Korea. And I think it was initiated by India and Yugoslavia. The faith was that they did not have to choose sides in that war because they felt that they were not aligned to either side, and therefore they needed to form a neutral stance that represents them. And I think after that, there was much more causes that needed that alignment to take place. Some of us, and why I say I don't understand the non-alignment movement well is it has not really featured so much as to warranty our awareness of it. The last time I had interaction with it was, I think, in history, when we talked about the Bandung conference, I think in Indonesia, its role and the role of the non-alignment movement in the decolonization of Africa. And so I think that, like you said, much of the non-alignment was was more relevant during the Cold War period, where most countries felt that they did not have to fight wars that were not theirs or need to suffer the consequences of choosing a side, yet that conflict or those conflicts are not relevant to them. So they decided to take a neutral stance, right? During the Cold War period. What I do not understand, and that's why I again emphasize I'm here amongst those who don't understand the non-alignment movement, was that after the end of the Cold War, even what do they call it? The German, when the curtain fell and marked the end of Cold War. What then is the relevance of the non-alignment movement? Because also I am thinking to myself that when you look at the current world as it is, I don't know if they call it multiple, you have the current contest really is between like the US and now China because of its economic capacity. Again, so what is the contest? Who are we not aligned to? We are non-aligned to what? I don't know. So in my understanding is that, and I put it on my socials yesterday, that the non-alignment movement is an aligned movement, just that it keeps swinging its alignment like a pendulum bob. I think that the non-alignment currently does not reflect that historical foundation which you want me to talk about. The reason as to why it was formed, I think, outlived its importance. There was no need to continue to play a neutral role. But most relevantly, because currently we have become more global, more alike or more similar than we were then, because then there was a lot of things that separated us, because there was communism, there was capitalism, and therefore there was a need for one to align with another, and they had no way out. I think currently we have all accepted, we have entered into a world of, I think, neoliberalism, acceptance of free markets. Even China, which perhaps was communist, has taken on state capitalism, where the state uses institutions to do business and engage in capitalism. So in my understanding, currently, I would say that the historical or the reason for its foundation is still not good to use to describe the current form of non-alignment movement that we are hosting today in Uganda.
Thank you, Lawel. Mercy. Lawel here expresses strong misgivings about the continued relevance of the non-aligned movement. But we see, we read from history that this is a movement that was founded on the principle of challenging, then the powerful Cold War era dual play between the then two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States. But today, and I think Lawel correctly points out that it's increasingly becoming an association of vacillators. It's very difficult to pinpoint what their exact stance on, keyword issues is. So we ask the question, is it still relevant from a historical perspective?
Yes, it is. And I think that when we're discussing the relevance from the historical perspective, we go back to the Bandung principles, which were coined at the Bandung conference in Indonesia, as Lawel rightly put it. And there were really three major objectives for the non-aligned movement to be established. The first one, obviously, that they did not want to meddle into the affairs that was going on between the USA and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. But then also there was the aspect of decolonialism, that at the time when the NAM was established, there were still countries in the global south that were still under colonial governments. And it was imperative that they form a group that would have a global stance to advocate for the decolonization of those states. And apart from that, then there was the need to foster economic development of these states. The question then is, in this contemporary world, is it still relevant to decolonize? Is it still relevant to discuss economic integration and economic growth? The answer is yes. Whereas we have now moved and shifted from the normative colonialism, we still find ourselves in the conundrum of neocolonialism. We have the modern day imperialism that have put our economies in shackles, our cultures, literally almost every aspect of our lives. And so it is still very relevant to discuss decolonization. Then in terms of economic growth and development, that is something that is very relevant, and something that this NAM, which is obviously a South-South confederation, is very important to achieve that. That you see, even now when obviously the African countries are mostly low developed countries and the least developed countries, plus the countries in the Latin Americas and some of the countries that are in Asia. And the NAM right now is also, it's not happening just alone. There is also the group 77 member states that are also there, plus China. And when you look at the current economic trends, that some of the leading economists right now are Asian. They're Asian countries, and they are part of the G77 and NAM. So it's very, very important for us to have a movement that brings on board some of the most developed countries in the world and some of the least developed countries in the world for economic discussions, to see how we can have technological transfers and knowledge sharing and have discussions on what can be done. So even when, Lawel says that we have now shifted from that, now maybe if we are to speak about if it's relevant for these countries to stay non-aligned.
It's okay.
Yes. So yes, Lawel puts forward the idea that the world is increasingly becoming a global village. And now we have common shared goals and aspirations on a global scale and not just individualistic things. And I agree with that. And maybe we shouldn't be looking at the non-allied movement as just a group of people that definitely make their stand that for us we are not allied with any political player. That is a thing that cannot happen anymore. There has to be some sort of alignment. But I think the whole basis of the NAM is that there were Bandung principles that were established during the Bandung conference. Are we still, and it's a 10-point it's a 10-point principle, by the way. And they discuss issues of democratization, issues of human rights, issues of fighting against terrorism, decolonization, as I have said, economic growth. When you look at all those 10 principles, I think it's still something that is very relevant. So for as long as we have not yet shifted from that 10-point declaration, I think that the NAM is still relevant.
Brideger, before I come to you, let me allow Lawel a minute to just...
Would you say that in the present state, NAM is just a China-led movement or pro-China movement?
Are you asking me if it's a pro-China movement?
Or a China-led movement, yeah.
I can't say yes or no, right? Because you see, from time immemorial, there has always been a leader in the political dynamics of the world. That there was a point, even from pre-colonial times, when France was leading under Napoleon, was leading in geopolitics generally. It then shifted to a certain point where Russia comes up, with the Soviet Union and everything. It shifts then to the US. There's always someone that leads in the global sphere. So if now it's China's turn, who are we to say no? Because that's what history has already shown us, that there's always someone that spearheads something. And the thing is, countries are not at gunpoint that you should follow this person or not. Yes? So if we find the global south, all the global southern countries saying that we agree with Chinese ideology and we think that there is much more to our benefit from following the Chinese ideology, then it's okay for as long as they can achieve the objectives and the aspirations that they want. Because if they're not choosing the Chinese ideology, they are still probably going to be choosing the European ideology or the American ideology. So,
Brideger, from a contemporary global geopolitical standpoint, can you say that NAM is an association of independent member states that have sufficient clout to influence events at an international landscape?
First of all, we need to understand the core principles of NAM. One of the core principles of NAM, why it was formed and why it was created. One of the core principles of NAM was that national independence, that all the countries that are under NAM and all the ones which maybe want to join NAM should get that independence. Secondly, sovereignty. Thirdly, they also went to look at not these external foreign powers interfering in internal affairs of the country. That was also one of the principles that NAM has been laid on. So when you look at those principles and maybe you talk about relevance, you look at our countries, a country like Uganda, what are we basing on, or what are we looking at? If we are under NAM, are we going to have these principles at play? Are we going to follow the core principles of NAM? And is it going to help a nation like Uganda? Yes, you people are talking about the issue of relevance. I mean, I see that NAM will remain relevant even after here, due to the principles that it is laid on, and even afterwards, and even in the future, because of those principles they have. The principles of national independence, sovereignty, the principles of not the external powers interfering with, or the foreign powers interfering with what is happening in the nation, or the internal affairs, etc. Now, you will understand, as he was explaining, that NAM was specifically brought in the picture due to the fact that there are these powers which were actually having their Cold Wars, and they didn't want these other countries to be part of the affairs that do not concern them. So when you look at even non-allied, that specifically means that countries which are not specifically allied to a specific bloc, and that I may bring in to mean maybe Western powers, countries which are allied for togetherness, for economic prosperity, for development. Remember, most countries which are under NAM are least developed countries or developing countries. And how can these countries move forward? How can these countries have diplomatic influence on different conferences and different aspects of this life, so that they can also be maybe balanced or be on the same page with the other powers? How can they? They have to be under that umbrella so that they can move forward. And I think the relevance of NAM is mostly that.
Yeah.
Lawel, NAM has achieved its two primary goals. Number one, decolonization for the large global south as we understand it today. Secondly, the one for the so-called economic empowerment of the member states. Because today we live in a world where member states are free to negotiate and conclude bilateral agreements and treaties which are beneficial for their economic stimulation and strength and empowerment. However, how do you now reconcile, that reality with the idea that, NAM exists to further decolonize in a modern sense? Is it an invention? What's that they are decolonizing against? Because all these speaking are independent, sovereign states.
And I think I've had this discussion with Mercy and many people when we're talking about ESC, that it is okay for you to evaluate these communities on the basis of them being economic vehicles. to bolster economic development or economic shared interests. Because they always create a platform where you can, negotiate, because economics is an interest every country or even
Collectively?
every individual holds. No, I don't think collectively, but I think it creates a platform where these people meet and create rapport and have something they share in common. So it fosters economic discussions, that the forum, the presence of a platform does. And when you look at our local media, that all they're trying to say, oh, we get to advertise, or we get to attract tourists, those benefits are not disputable. It's just that for me, I always don't think that an entity like non-alignment movement, that is the primary factor on which we should best to evaluate it. I think sometimes there are secondary benefits of having a platform like the non-alignment movement. I don't know. I want to agree with him that we must accept that what we have is an anti-Western kind of movement or bloc, or people who are anti-West trying to use it to build their influence and use it as a counter to that. And I think why NAM presently is relevant is because now we are getting in a time where there's a lot of either global conflict or global, like the environment or the vibe of Cold War still exists. I think with Russia invading Ukraine and with Israel and Palestine, so there is need for countries to sort of find movements or caucuses or platforms where they can form positions and push back. And I think that's why NAM becomes relevant now, because if you are talking about things like sovereignty and independence, then the question of Russia, Ukraine becomes contentious, because Russia, a member, is attacking Ukraine. You have an issue of China and I think is it Taiwan. So it also becomes problematic. Who currently is the real colonizer? Yeah, there are those who believe that the West is a neo-colonialist, but when we break down that neo-colonialism, what does it look like? And is it really exclusive to the West? Would you say that China, that for anyone to extend, even if it's economic interest, they need to have some level of influence over the governments that rule over where the economic interests lie? Like that, for example, if China wants to exploit Uganda, they must have some sort of leverage on our government, and therefore it means neocolonialism is not something avoidable. It's only avoidable if we as Africans or individual states build our own internal capacity to push back or to self-sustain. That if we cannot self-sustain as individual countries, we are always susceptible to foreign influence, whether it is US, whether it is China, whether it's Russia. I am not persuaded that if we won the war against the West and the West was subdued and they are no longer the global power, that we would not have any influence over any other emerging force, because history shows us that the emerging force always uses their power to dominate. So I don't want to be lost in the rhetoric of anti-Western, because if we're anti-West, how sure are we that the alternative will not perhaps also be as influencing? Me, what I want to talk about is the local politics. I think that because of non-alignment and how there's a lot of global conflict or even conversation, that a lot of countries are sort of taking sides, forming blocks, and maybe the West is sort of at the receiving end, because it has to defend itself, especially its position on Israel. It cannot start new wars against their opponents now, or even dictatorships. So in my view, if Museveni becomes a new chair of the non-alignment movement, which is now would gain momentum, it becomes hard for the West to condemn such dictators, because the non-alignment and its chairperson will think that, oh, this is the arrogance that the West always espouses. I don't know if you're getting it, that Museveni no longer represents just Uganda, he represents as the chair of the non-alignment movement, and maybe an attack on him can be extrapolated as an attack on, can be interpreted as the arrogance of the West against all these other countries that are members of non-alignment, and therefore it becomes hard for the people who want to agitate for change in Ugandan context while appealing to the West to get the overt support that the West would always offer by standing in solidarity with them or even funding them. So I think the next 3 years, Museveni being the chair of NAM gives him some level of high ground or some level of immunity against the West, especially also the fact that the anti-homosexuality bill had put him at the receiving end of the West. So he can always use the NAM and all these new friends as to say, look, this is not just me and homosexuality versus the West, it's the West arrogance versus the rest of us. And I think for me, that's the consequence of Uganda assuming the NAM chairmanship. Yeah, that's how relevant NAM is to me, at least.
Those are strong views on the subject, Lawel, especially now that they reference the person of the president and the very, sticky issue of the Anti-Homosexuality Act. But now that provokes my next question for Mercy. Mercy, there is intense criticism that is directed at the NAM as a vanity project, criticism which, in my assessment, I am rather persuaded to think it's legitimate, really. Because we understand that one of the key topics for discussion is the Palestine Israel conflict, which is raging on today. So if we are to imagine a situation where the heads of state in Munyonyo consider and pass a resolution that either we are siding with the legitimate political territorial aspirations of the Palestinian people, and we rule that Israel should maybe refrain from such and such actions, do you really think it would have any impact in practical terms? What does that then portend for the continued relevance of the organization if it lacks the capacity to enforce its resolutions?
I think the first thing that we have to understand, actually, before I even get to that, you see, when you say that these people want to be non-allied, should it have stopped during the Cold War? Shouldn't it mean then that even up to now in contemporary geopolitics, they should be non-aligned? And that means that as the NAM, they should not be pro-Palestine or pro-Israel. I would ideally think that if we have chosen to be neutral, then, let's be neutral. But then that cannot happen. We know that very recently Kenya announced its stand on that on that already, and it's very openly supporting the state of Israel. Yes, and Kenya is a part of NAM. There are other countries that might not have proclaimed that we are supporting this country, but they have. It can be implied from their policies and the things that they're actually doing that they are already aligned in that context. Now, back to where I was starting, that we have to understand that NAM does not exist in a vacuum. And NAM is not an invisible hand. It is part and parcel of international law and in the international legal framework. What does that then mean? It means that the kind of potency that international law has is the same kind of potency that NAM has, because NAM is an international body that brings together these states. The question that we usually like to ask ourselves as lawyers is international law really law?
On that point, before we answer that question,
yes.
If your argument is that in terms of international law and its application, NAM is on the same footing as the other internationally recognized organization, let's say the UN. Is it therefore your view that a resolution of the NAM Heads of State Summit would have the same potency as a resolution of for example, the Assembly of the Security Council of the UN in terms of implementation? Because the Security Council can, wake up one morning and say, for the preservation of international peace and security, such a government should leave power, and it will be implemented without any reservations from anyone.
Implemented by who?
By them, the Security Council, as the top
Isaac,
organ.
Now, again, my submission would probably help us resolve that, because as I was asking, is international law really law? And one of the reasons why people have said that international law is not law, it is indeed a barking dog that does not bite, is that we have had time and time again states being in conflict, the Security Council sitting, the Human Rights Council sitting, and all these other states sitting, coming up with pronouncements which actually are not implemented. One of the reasons why these things are not implemented is because the international legal frameworks, the UN does not have an international police. Yes, we do not have an actual watchdog. You could say that the Security Council might do that. But we saw during the Ukraine and Russian conflict, even when after the, and I actually was part of the monitoring committee for the Human Rights Council. The states, you know, there were resolutions in the floor to denounce Russia's activities against Ukraine. But how did that help? Up to now, that the war is still going on now, it's just that now our focus has shifted to Israel and Palestine. But nothing has really, you know, been done. Now, when we come back to NAM, if the UN itself, which is ideally the biggest international body that, you know, with all these laws and all these other enforcement mechanisms, has failed to implement some of its resolutions, then NAM, which is the second biggest after the UN, it probably still has the same fate, really. That yes, and I know that they have been drafting the Kampala outcome document, which has culminated into the Kampala Declaration. But of what potency will that declaration be? I actually think it might not be as potent. And the reason why international law always has the same fate, to always fail. Okay, not like always fail, 100% fail, but to a larger extent in terms of implementation, usually fails, is the idea that states are sovereign. And states have the power to actually make their own laws and policies and all that. And then the other, which is also a principle of the Bandung Conference, that a state has the right to defend itself. Yes. So if one of your core principles of the document that establishes you says that for us as countries, we believe that each state has the right to defend themselves. And now during the proceedings at the ICJ, we are hearing Israel say that for us, our actions, and I'm not speaking towards whether they are right or not, but they are claiming that their actions against the Hamas and against Palestine is as a result of defending themselves. So would then the NAM go against that principle, regardless of whether they are right or not, right? Yeah. So that is something that we need to actually think about. It's not just about heads of state and the fact that, oh, we are heads of state, we are coming to sit down and signing a document, and then this document should bind someone. Bind who? An independent state? What exactly are you trying to do? The only reason why the UN and all the resolutions that they pass might say that, you know, they are succeeding is because of the sanctions that are being put. But now if a state like Uganda, what kinds of sanctions do you think most of these states are going to put in a state like Israel? Israel has been very clear in that declaration that not even the ICJ, not even the Hague is going to stop them. Then, and the Hague is the embodiment of the legal body of the UN. So if they are saying that the UN actually has no power over them, then what chance does NAM stand? So it still goes back to the whole point that because we are acting in an international sphere, we have international legal instruments, which history has already shown us is not the most effective tool to bring states to book. The same fate will befall NAM and the resolutions that they pass.
Thank you, Mercy. Bridger, let us now examine the numerical strength of NAM and interrogate whether it actually means anything. Because, like we stated here, today NAM is the second largest international body of independent member states, only behind the UN. In Uganda, we have about just close to 30 heads of state out of the 120 that were expected to attend the summit. First thing, doesn't that then point to something? Maybe a lack of trust in the collective mandate of the institution and its potency. Number two, with that huge number.
I beg your pardon on that again.
The first question is, if the association, that international body, has a membership of 120 countries, but only 30 of those feature for the summit, what does that portend for the, the strength and unity of the organization? But secondly, with that reality, we have in Uganda here a sticky issue like the Anti-Homosexuality Act. Now, there are members of the non-aligned movement who actually promote, you know, do I call it a practice? Is it homosexuality for that matter? Then there are those who are strongly opposed to homosexuality, but we see they are now in convergence together in Kampala. So on some of those key issues, do the numbers actually matter? Or at the end of the day, it is the idea that, you know, we conveniently meet to maybe, as Mase here strongly urges, to check the so-called arrogancy of the Western powers, but at the end of the day, there isn't anything to show as a result.
First of all, I would like to say that NAM as a movement has a very big impact. I think that's the first thing you talked about, you questioned me, the impact of it. I've been hearing what she has been saying about maybe NAM not collectively helping a country, maybe if it is need of aid and etc. When you look at NAM as an umbrella...
That's not what I said, but...
Okay, it was something like that.
Maybe she could clarify.
NAM as an umbrella has gone ahead to give aid to specific countries. For example, India. When was it China which attacked India? Was it forgotten the year? But then NAM condemned the act, and it went on to support India in that case. When you look at also is it 1992, when the Soviet Union actually attacked, is it Iran? The NAM was there to condemn such acts. Now, when you talk about NAM maybe siding with a specific maybe country that is not under the umbrella, because we know that NAM is something that is non-aligned, something that is not going to align with other bloc. If, for example, is Israel part of NAM? It cannot be part of NAM. So, if a country like Kenya comes up and says that it wants to support Israel with what it is doing, then for sure, as one of the core principles of NAM is that you shouldn't interfere with the internal affairs of a nation. So if if Kenya has decided so, then I think NAM has no say. But it can be used as a platform, maybe because now Kenya is under NAM. It can be used as a platform to see how such a nation which is under NAM, how it can go about it. Because it is one of the principles, shouldn't align with the other bloc because of specific reasons and etc. So, you remind me of the last thing you talked about.
Can I just ask before you go to the next question, that because you know he says that they have the principle of not interfering with state affairs,
yes.
And so if a state like Kenya decides to stand up for Israel, then NAM should not have any say in Kenya's Kenya's policy because it's an internal affair for Kenya. Then don't you think that probably portends for the downfall of NAM? Because that creates a conundrum that there are general principles that as member states we must sign and adhere to. If we are saying that we are not going to be aligned to any other external bloc that exists, as he so puts, right? Then that means that NAM as a bloc has to have a stand that says we cannot do this. When you now have individual member states saying that because one of your principles is that you cannot interfere into my affairs, then I can do whatever I do. Kenya makes their stand. Maybe Uganda goes and makes their stand. Then later on, India makes their stand. And all of them are not in accordance with that. What then does that mean for NAM?
Is it your view that it's possible for that summit as a collective to have consensus on a single position?
Does it have to have consensus?
It doesn't have to have consensus. So that's why I was asking him then, because, you know, there was like a point which kind of I got lost in, and I wanted him to clarify.
Then if it won't have consensus, or if it cannot have consensus, doesn't it raise legitimate concerns about the very
exactly, and that is what I'm saying.
Efficacy
yes.
of
but you see,
mandate?
Isaac, you see how the UN works, right? And idea, it would be nice for them as they sit to have consensus on
leave alone the
But
practical
Isaac,
strength and capacity to implement
Isaac.
the resolutions. I'm simply saying general agreement
Isaac.
on key international issues.
It
Is
never
possible?
happens.
Isaac,
It can never
let me
happen
just say this.
that a council has consensus. When the Human Rights Council sits and there's a resolution that is being discussed, there's usually never consensus. Why? Because even within that, where we know that, you know, maybe we have all these members of state, there are certain principles that we actually have to abide by. There are different factions that exist. Right? You have the African group going as an African group, and they have their own interests. You have the Caribbean states coming as like that. So they're even within that one block that is there are certain states that have their own interests, and sometimes it might lend less efficacy to the whole block as a whole, which ideally, as you said, should raise concerns for NAM as well.
Lawel, before Bridge, I'm coming back to you.
I think that if we want to analyze non-alignment, but also to the standard of other strong, they may not be as big, but they're strong entities, whether it is ECOWAS or even the UN, is that unlike those, the NAM does not have like strong legal framework, or if you violate this is a penalty. They don't have maybe a court like we have ICC or ICJ. It's much more of a forum of goodwill and shared principles where we can negotiate and have a stand. Before I answer the efficacy, just to answer the what if we had a resolution, what does it mean? I don't think it's to the extent that can we intervene militarily or can we prosecute Israel. I think it is that it counts to have such a block of people voicing their position on a global matter of conflict, whether its effect is to how the UN or General Assembly reacts or the Security Council. It is that when you have such a block, a group of more than 100 countries voicing their position, it counts. Because look, you're not going to counter Israel in one day or the US, but at least you're going to have continued pressure being generated. I don't know if you're getting it. Even when it doesn't defeat Israel outrightly, it limits on how they continue to engage because they need buy-in from the world. So if you have a forum of 124 having a strong position, even if it's just a declaration, even if it's just a voicing that what you're doing is bad, and I think Israel and US, for the issue of their continued influence, they don't take that lightly. But I think what I wanted to say is that in forums, even if it is the parliament, even if it's NRM caucus, even if it's EAC, all countries don't have to agree ab initio. We can agree that we can discuss and debate and have consensus. If we don't have consensus, we can have majority. I don't know if you're getting it. Yeah. I think the beauty about non-alignment is that it doesn't have a lot of enforcement mechanisms. So it's not that if you don't agree, there's a big penalty that warrants you to then fight back and then break it. It's that we can, if you don't agree, it is okay, but the general goodwill and position of NAM is this, and this is how it ought to move. That's what I think.
Thanks, Lawel. Brideger, my question.
So now we were still talking about the issue of sovereignty and maybe a country not interfering in the issues of another country. Now, with NAM being that umbrella that countries which are members sit down, and maybe with the issue she has been talking about of Kenya having the sovereignty to take charge of what it wants to do. I think with the issue of NAM, they have to always sit down and discuss these issues and see what maybe can come up out of the discussions, because it does not have an enforcement power that if you don't do this, then this is what is going to happen. That if you don't do this, so it is all about them sitting and having a dialogue and maybe discussing the issues that might be affecting that specific nation, or what that they take that nation as stake. Because when you talk about a non-allied movement, it means that you just be neutral. Let us be together. We're a developing nation. We can develop. We can have our own principles that we stand on, and maybe we fight. We see how we can maybe balance with the big lion or defeat the big lion. Then with the issue of maybe homosexuality and maybe a country like Uganda, which has its strong beliefs This is where NAM comes in, because it comes in to say that you as a country, you have your own power, you have your own leaders, so you have to decide on yourself. So if someone is imposing pressure on you, for example, maybe the Western powers, they want you to go ahead with homosexuality, and you as a nation, Uganda, you're not into that. NAM gives you that platform that you as a nation, you have your own sovereignty, you can make your own decision, and we can still defend you. So I think even NAM goes ahead to give more support as we think. Even military, as I told you, for the case of China and India, you are a member, and it also comes in to help you because you are a member, so that you're protected maybe from other external pressures, the foreign pressures. You can go independently as a country, and you make your own decisions.
Does the fact of the low turn-up of the heads of state for this summit indicate something of significance to you?
Of course it does, because I think there have been representatives. Of course, most nations have sent representatives, but of course it is something that is, when you are having such a conference or such a summit and people don't turn up, it sends a point of maybe unseriousness of other nations, which is not good. I think that is something that goes into a question of administration and how the country sees the movement, how it is. I think that is the question of administration. I don't think it shows a good picture at all, the low turnout.
Lawel, politically, it can be said that the Cold War era is way past behind us. But practically, with the reality of the shifting alliances in the global geopolitical landscape, there are countries, even here in Africa, that are known to be totally beholden to the West, the US in particular, to the extent that they cannot take a position on any key issues at the international level without undertaking serious consultations with the United States. In Africa, again, we have countries that have very strong ties with the Russian Federation, which is now the successor to the Soviet Union. Where does that leave the NAM? Because as we understand, if it's a collective of countries that have decided to be impartial in that contest, but to realize today the United States and the Russia Federation at loggerheads of a host of issues, key among which is the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. And it reflects in the outcome of the resolutions of the United Nations on that subject. You saw how, countries took a diversity of attitudes to that question. Where does that leave now?
That's why from the start, I was saying I represent those who don't know NAM, because I think we are at a stage where you cannot afford to say you are a group of people who are non-aligned to the modern issues. There's a contentious issue that Israel is attacking or Palestine is attacking. I think that if the non-alignment movement says that they don't have a position or they can't even discuss to take a position, I don't think they remain relevant. Because again, if we are a global entity which must discuss global positions and deal with challenges of the time. And so while they were not aligned to either communism or capitalism or at the time, because they felt they had own challenges or pressing challenges which needed to be dealt with at the time, which perhaps you could say was decolonization, right? And they had to take a position and they had to help those who needed to decolonize, right? So currently, we have this kind of crisis. Is Israel's presence in Gaza or in Palestine an occupation or not? I don't know if you're getting it. Is Hamas's action an act of terrorism or not? I think it is a debate that I do think that NAM cannot run away from, because to do so is to render yourself irrelevant if you can't discuss the problem of the time what business are you doing? I think that what NAM does really is, like I said before, is a platform where people can get caucus each other to garner influence. You have countries that have goodwill that come together, and you have strong proponents of something trying to push and caucus others to buy into that position and have a declaration. And that is why I am persuaded to think that NAM is largely a China-led alignment, and China uses it as a platform to garner more influence. Do I think that I think, like I said, I don't think countries have to agree ab initio. There are those who, because of what they believe in terms of national values or interests, choose to ally with the person who is consistent with their interests or their values. So if Kenya, for example, in its capitalistic sense, thinks that our values align with the West, or that we believe in US or Israel's cause, it is okay for Kenya to have that position. And it's okay for it to come with it on the table of discussion and interact with others and see how that happens. We can't say that just because all of us have our opinions, let's stick where we are. That doesn't really make sense. My only problem, and it's not that I don't like China or that I don't like the US, my own problem is that as Africa, we have refused to build our own internal capacity or even to generate our own African position. I don't like how we want to keep swinging. Now, this time it is the West. Now we're pro China.
Have the African Union.
At what time shall we be pro ourselves?
We have the African Union.
No, there's no, but you know that in this discussion, there's no African Union or African countries position. We are either pro this one or pro that one. We don't have a position. Even if it is true, and I wish NAM was only an African membership entity, and we say that Africa, we don't have any one we are aligning with between Russia and Ukraine, and that we have our own internal challenges that we are dealing with, which I also don't think is sustainable. But what I don't like is that we want to disguise ourselves as being in the NAM, but the truth is that we are selling ourselves to China. And that is why you have the following services that are going to follow NAM, that are China-led. That is what we are. And I think the problem, why it's like that, is that most of our leaders who are not aligned with the interests of their citizens know that they are better protected when they are aligning with China and Russia, because they are all the same. You can't whip Museveni when you are Putin or when you're Xi Jinping or Communist Party. And for me, that's why, as a normal citizen, I don't think that a China-led NAM or whatever it is in my interest. All it does is to entrench Museveni.
Oh.
That's my conclusion.
Mercy, with Lawel's views in mind, because now we are past where the era of the hegemonic duopoly, what we understood to be the Western-led bloc, and then the Eastern-led bloc, led by the US and the USSR, respectively. We now have a new entrant in China, and Lawel here tries to persuade me when he says now, NAM is a China-led bloc. So, in other words, China applies NAM as its front to maybe obtain leverage and negotiate better in the context of the international geopolitical dynamics. What's your take? Is NAM really subservient to China? Is it, playing by the orders or commands of the Chinese?
We not have reached that level. My assumption is it's a platform where China gets the opportunity to influence. It's a big dog. It's inevitable. Anyway, she has her opinion.
What's your view?
Okay, so first of all, as he has now given the disclaimer that it has not yet reached that level. So I think that probably maybe the discussion on that would be premature, because there is no evidence base that that China has actually used NAM to front this and this.
But it funds most of its budget. It seems to be at the center of a significant portion of the agenda.
Yes, and as I said before, that you see, when you take away China, there will be someone else to step into those shoes. to do that. And Lawel talks about the fact that as African countries, we need to build our own capacity so that we don't have to be aligned to someone to build it for us. Very recently, the AU, you talked about how about the AU, coming up with a stance on this and all that. But the AU's capacity to do anything is very little. Even building its own headquarters, it couldn't do that. China had to build the AU headquarters.
You reference China again?
Yes, China built the AU headquarters, and I've had people saying that, that China actually had bugged the offices, and they were actually literally present during all the discussions of the AU.
Information. Even
Yes.
here in Uganda, China built that. There's that twin tower sort of building
for the office of the president and the PM.
Yeah, it renovated State House. It donated our Ministry of Defense offices. It did the same for our UPDF headquarters in Bombo. And there are similar allegations that they might have entered their technology to spy.
Oh.
Like China is...
I hope they haven't back the State House. Yes,
so, well, these are things that the musings that the ordinary citizen might have, that, it's possible that they have done so. But even if they haven't done so, what is their interest in doing that, right? Because as I know it, most of these major powers that are playing in the geopolitical fora, it's a quid pro quo arrangement. They cannot, someone just doesn't come and say that, oh, I'm going to do this for you and that's it because of my goodwill. No, there's obviously something that they want at the end of the day. So it could be that so that you can align yourself with their national interests, or that when they need your help at a certain point, you will stand up for them. So when Lawel says that, NAM is seemingly looking like a China-led organization, so that maybe China could use it in future so that they can maybe front their interests and all that stuff. That is also a plausible submission. We cannot just sweep it across because China...
It's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that China has not reached such power as to say, dance to my tunes. I'm just saying it has used it to garner influence. Like it influences its direction. Not in the clear terms of, if I don't approve of this, you won't do it. It's just that I am the one who drives the narrative. That is different.
Yes, but also
the other is an extreme power dynamic.
Okay.
I think it also justifies what she said, because if that's the case, then that simply means that China can use that as leverage in its effort to counterbalance the power of the United States, for example, because this is now
we must agree competition. We must agree that the current world is USA and its allies, France, England, led this side, and China, Russia this side, and therefore we must agree that the NAM is not non-aligned; it is aligned to this side.
Okay.
Significantly.
First, wait. You guys are running away with my point, and I really want to make it.
Yeah.
Especially with what Lawel has said, that China might not have reached that stage where he's saying, "Do this, or I don't do this for you." But you see, where the world has reached right now, we frown upon such kind of influence. In fact, because that kind of influence is what colonialism was. Right now, what we have is a new face of what was. Right? And what is that new face? We have soft power now. That you see, if China has done all these things for you, then there is an invisible hand that then guides the pen. What signatures, where are you putting where you are penning your signatures and all that. You get? So you might say that, it's not saying do this and do this, but in actual sense, that is what it is. True. It just comes in a different manifestation. Yeah. So what was the first point? The question that you had asked in terms of what Lawel had discussed?
Regarding the Chinese American.
Yes. Yes, actually to that. So as I was saying, I think, you said that we have moved away from the geo-hegemonic format. But I think that maybe what we have done is that we have just shifted the dynamic, and instead of having a dual system, now we have a triplicate system, that we have the US and its allies on one hand, you have the Russian Federation and its allies on the other hand, and now you have the Chinese and its allies on the one hand. Africa as a swinging pendulum ball, and in accordance to who at the point is at the top of the axis, is where it goes. And obviously that begs a question that Africa should get a spine. We need to take a stand of our own. If need be, let us make it a quadruple that, you know, Africa also becomes a power.
Yeah.
But it's increasingly very hard to get there because we still do not have the economic liberation to actually do that. And that's why we're still relying on China to do most of our infrastructure development for us. Most of our economic development is still in the hands of either the Chinese or the Western powers. So until Africa reaches the point of economic liberation, and that's why in the short term, I would think it is important for Africa to be part of the NAM, right? Even when it seems like it might be a China-led thing, because the only way to actually have that kind of sovereign power to make a stand for yourself is to first to have economic liberation, to have economic independence. And the only way you're going to have economic independence is by playing with the people who already have that independence, gaining from them to strengthen your own position. And once that position has been strengthened, then you can start to make pronouncements of your own, which will actually be respected.
Thank you, Mercy. This is the Focus on Parliament show on Civic Space TV, brought to you by the Center for Constitutional Governance. We now take a short break. After the break, we examine if the Non-Aligned Movement Summit here in Kampala has any tangible benefits for the Ugandan citizen. See you after the break.
National Water and Sewage Corporation is committed to providing cost-effective, clean, safe and reliable quality water and sewage solutions in urban centers across Uganda. National Water and Sewage Corporation reaffirms its commitment to 100% service coverage, geographical expansion, infrastructure development, water quality, pro-poor initiatives, customer care and stakeholder engagement, catchment and water source protection. Be a water hero. Pay your bills to zero balance, report all leaks, busts and illegal water connections to enable us serve you better. Reach us through our toll-free numbers on 0800 200 977 or 0800 300 977. You can also communicate with us through any of our online platforms or visit the National Water and Sewage Corporation office nearest to you. This message is brought to you by National Water and Sewage Corporation.
Welcome back. This is the Focus on Parliament show on Civic Space TV. In this segment, we consider and investigate the question as to whether the NAM Summit in Kampala here has any tangible benefits for the Ugandan state or even, by extension, the citizen. Brideger, I start with you.
Yes.
Now, Lawel here stated at the onset of the show that he's rather, at pains to exactly define what NAM is in light of the contemporary geopolitical developments. As a Ugandan, because I've seen many, media companies conduct interviews with average citizens and they wonder what NAM is exactly. Do you think there is anything materially positive to derive from this summit?
Yeah, I think the fact that we are hosting NAM, there are possibilities and very many possibilities of the tourism sector getting some income. For example, looking at these delegates that have come, have been brought by NAM, are occupying our hotels. They are renting the hotels. They are buying food. So that actually means that the people, the local Ugandans, are being employed. So there are a rise of employment opportunities due to the fact that there is NAM. Because all these delegates, you have to, there are drivers who are driving them, there are people who are being employed in the hotels, and etc. So I think the fact that the NAM is being hosted in Uganda, it has actually boosted the tourism sector. And also leaving that aside, looking at the international eye on us right now, because we will understand that since Uganda is hosting such a big event, then the international eye is on us. And how is this helping us? It is going ahead to actually even help our tourism sector, because as they know more about Uganda, as they come and they feel the urge of coming to visit it. More so, we are not only looking at that, but you can also see the benefits of NAM as an umbrella. When Uganda is under NAM, what benefits does it have as a country? One, let us talk about peace and security. NAM the fact that Uganda is under the umbrella of NAM, there is a possibility of it being defended in any way. I mean, these are very many countries that have come together with a common cause. So possibly in case of any attack to the nation, they could talk about it. And Uganda, surely it is something that can help our security and peace, because they can easily come together and say that since Uganda is facing this challenge, we are actually helping it in this way. Let's talk about humanitarian aid. Uganda hosts over 1.4 million refugees. When you are under a platform like NAM, I think you're able to seek for that support. So Uganda has a platform, and it's a benefit. Seek for any support. It could be economic-wise, it could be infrastructure. Foreign investors have come. Uganda can now make deals they have close ties together. The countries are around. We can always make deals with those people. More so, the fact that NAM is around, and very many countries that are around and they are being represented here, this can help us get knowledge and also maybe technology transfer, like how when she talked about it, technology transfer. From the conference itself, we can learn a lot from these other people from other countries. And that is a benefit itself, the technology transfer and also the knowledge and the skills. Then also economically, we, as I said earlier, we can always have trade deals with them, with these people that have come under the umbrella of NAM. These people who are representing their countries. We can have foreign investors, and these are now direct negotiations and deals that we are going to make with these people, which are going to improve our country. So I think there are very many tangible benefits, but those are the ones I can talk about as per now. And I think NAM being around and us being under the umbrella of NAM, it surely has many benefits, things that we surely have a lot that we can benefit from it. Thank you.
Lawel, NAM is something you said is rather amorphous to you. And now, today, the president, our president, has been elected to, chair the forum of the heads of state for the next, I think, 3 years. With that elevation, in office for him as now the first among equals, does it really come with anything tangible for the ordinary Ugandan?
I don't know. I think most of us, I don't know. I think we don't have a lot of expectations from our country, and that's why we are okay with small marginal benefits. Or they're going to come here, it's going to boost tourism. We could even ask ourselves statistically how much is going to translate into that. The drivers, again, for me, these are peanuts, especially when you're examining that robust, you're part of a big movement or a big organization. I don't think that the benefits we should be talking about our drivers, the hotels. I think those are really small things. My problem is that I think that countries which are able to benefit from these things are countries which are better prepared. So you have an infrastructure put in place, you have a policy infrastructure that allows you to have these benefits. And then when I look at Rwanda and I look at us, I'm more persuaded to think that, Rwanda seems to be much prepared in terms of, it has put in place various facilities. It seems to be deliberate on its tourism appeal to the entire world, even if it's posturing or lying about some things. But see, there's deliberate effort and there's an infrastructure.
They lie better.
There's an infrastructure that when you host such, it is able to feed into the already existing infrastructure. And then you sustainably garner those benefits. I don't think we have them.
We don't appreciate our roads.
When you look at, I saw there was that flyer where the private sector foundation put space for people advertising, and it was charging our people $5,000 to showcase. And you're like, is that little money? Does the private sector foundation care for us? I'm sure the people really who are going to take up that space are people who are already big, or even global other companies which have come in here, or like those which get the equity from the big guys from the foreign joint venture guys. So I don't think that in terms of sustainable benefits, we have put in place an infrastructure. I also don't think that the current government is strategic in terms of wanting to benefit from these big entities. And when you look at the people around, there are normal people, our thieves, our misappropriators. You want to understand our preparedness, you look at how Museveni decided to send Rwabogo to negotiate our AGOA deal with the US after they were threatening to kick us out of it. Of course they did, but where I was saying, the reason why this is happening is you had the president sign the anti-homosexuality bill. In any sound mind, you don't send your son-in-law to negotiate on behalf of the country to engage such a trade deal as AGOA. It makes it hard to convince me that the same people, same mind have capacity to utilize the benefits that they will get from NAM. We are just on social media looking at how they have misappropriated $10 million supposed to be put in developing our coffee sector and value addition, $10 million. You get no reason to believe that it's good, because academics have been told when you have people come into the country, you get tourism, you get tourism attractions, you get showcase. We assume that these benefits exist by the virtue of the academic bit of it. But the truth is that we have not built infrastructure to benefit, and we don't. Again, we have put a lot of money in renovating roads, which you always have to. We have invested a lot. We've given Sudil a lot of money to put in place that conference hall, which is going to own the large shares. Of course, there have been peanut gains, like the drivers, like the employment, but those are not things we should value so much if we're hosting or part of such a very big movement organization. I may be pessimistic, but that's my analysis of things.
Well, Mercy, Lawel here looks to be a very cynical person. With respect to the NAM summit, he seems to be utterly cynical. But I want to know, do you think on both, maybe to break it down, a diplomatic front, on the economic front, and that would be perhaps in a broad sense as a country, but as a citizen also, is there anything of tangible benefit that can be derived out of this summit?
Lawel might seem cynical, but I think he has a point. And maybe we should first start by asking ourselves, what did the ordinary Ugandan benefit from the Chogom conference that happened?
Yeah.
Right? This is not the first conference that Uganda is hosting. There have been summits before that we have hosted. Maybe we should first start by asking ourselves, because the previous ones that happened did not happen under a different regime. Yeah. It's the same regime, probably the same ministers, the same officials. So what tangible difference is there going to be from that? That's maybe, I'm actually as a pessimistic, I think, as Lawel, by saying that probably 2 or 3 months after the summit, we shall also hear that someone has embezzled certain funds from it. Yeah. And in a country like Uganda with a questionable governance system, it is possible that such a report will come out. Now, leave alone that, and maybe I'll now go into the more academic, as Lawel says it, benefits. It is And I think that it would be unfortunate if we did not tap into that. And maybe it's a call for our economic advisors, our policy analysts and all, to see that maybe from now on we put in place infrastructure that can actually harness the potential that such summits can bring to us. It's not just about, you know, the beautiful paint that you know, that it looks beautiful 1 or 2 days, but then the thing is, if the summit wasn't happening, ideally would never actually have gotten there, you know. But it also probably shows the fact that we are pretentious as a country. You know, we're pretentious. But anyway, economically, I think the potential is huge. And when you look at the Africa continental free trade area alone, which has a market potential of about $1.6 billion, right? Then you look at the EAC alone, which its combined economy amounts to about $350 billion compared to Uganda's flimsy approximately $50 million only. So when you look at the fact that all these states are here together, and these people have not come just the head of summit and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, they've obviously come with certain sort of protocol and advisors that you could actually, as he said, sit down with and discuss investment opportunities. Uganda has a very young but very promising oil and gas sector. In terms of mineral capacity, we have lots and lots of minerals. We might not have the capacity to actually exploit this sector to benefit our countries, to benefit our economy, but you have people who have come from economies where they have harnessed the potential, their natural resources, and have actually grown economically. So this could be a point where we have knowledge sharing. We actually establish channels of communication, of collaboration and cooperation in the economic in the economic perspective. We can even have like opportunities for joint ventures, foreign direct investment in the country. This is a very, very vital platform for these players to actually meet and discuss. Her Excellency Jessica Lupo, when she was having the bilateral meeting with the Vice President of Cuba, you know, they talked about the fact that during a previous visit that she had in Havana, they had talked about still knowledge transfer in terms of the ICT sector, science and technology. So, you know, when that has already happened and then they come and meet again here in Uganda, that concretizes the relationship that they already had. So even in terms of diplomacy, when such summits happen and heads of state actually get to sit, because it's not every day, these people are heads of state, but they don't necessarily share ideas on a regular basis, right? So when they have a whole 1 week period where they can sit down and share ideas, best practices and all that stuff, then you could say that, you know, it's possible for Uganda to even have to copy best practices from other countries to do that. The question that Lawel asked, do we have the infrastructure to actually absorb this and, you know, bring it back into our economy? Yes, to make it sustainable. And I think another thing that that intrigued me is the program, the spouses program. I don't know if you guys took time to actually look at that. I was very intrigued and amused by it that, you know, obviously these people have come with their spouses, and, you know, the Ugandan government, as hospitable as it is, has come up with a spousal program for them. And it might be something of amusement, but I think really, because on the program they were talking about, you know, Janet Museveni sharing her journey on women and girls empowerment in the country, and also having a time where the other first ladies and the other spouses of these ministers that have come also share their best practices from their countries on how they have empowered the girl child and women in their country. There's a segment slotted for a tour of the Mulago women, the specialized women and neonatal center, you know, having a tour and having discussions on that. You know, you could ask yourself, okay, if they have sat down and shared stories as wives of presidents and wives of ministers and all these dignitaries, what could come out of it? But I think having discourse, just as we're having right now, is one of the ways in which we can actually contribute towards development processes. The question is it something that they are going to carry out of their recreational centers and their meeting halls? Because I know, for example, that Kenya has very progressive laws, legislations that are in place, especially those that are concerning women and girl empowerment, right? So if they came and gave the Kenyan perspective of that to our First Lady and to the other Ugandan people who are holding our flag of empowerment high, if we could borrow that their approach, then it could be something that trickles down even to the ordinary citizen. At the end of the day, the question is, do we have systems and policies in place whereby after the summit is done, we can have a working group that sits down and actually crystallizes the things that they have discussed here, that actually sits down and has, because I see that the East Africa Investment Forum and Trade Exhibition, one of the objectives that the expected outcomes that they have from this summit is to have a compendium for investors, for example, where they'll have investors and what sectors they're willing to invest in, their contact addresses and all that, which then creates kind of like a foundation to start negotiating these deals, to start all of this. If we do not let this just end at the level of our capitalistic cronies, you know, but actually do something that will eventually trickle down to the ordinary citizen, then the Ugandans can benefit. But if not, we shall have the same thing that happened in Chogam, and 2 years down the road, we are even in more debt than we ever had been. Yeah, so that is my take on it.
Brideger,
Yes.
there is a reference to, you know, our catastrophic past history with respect to organizing these huge international conferences and summits.
Yes.
Chogam is a very notorious example, certainly. But in the past days, there have been concerns by Ugandans, the ordinary citizens, casting doubt on the capacity of the government to prepare and organize such big events. You see the campaign, which has now hugely turned political over the poor state of our roads. And when the government came out to intervene, there is now a charge, again fronted by the citizens, that they prioritized roads which the guests are going to use as routes to either the venue or to their residences and whatnot. But for the other roads, which the ordinary Ugandan uses, there is nothing. They are impassable. They are littered with potholes. What's your view? Does this government have the capacity to really host such events? Because Masa here is convinced with, you know, better capacity, there could be really a lot of benefit to the Ugandans. What do you think?
First of all, Uganda itself being under the umbrella of NAM, it has that responsibility to host. And it having the responsibility, then it has to take the initiative to make sure that it hosts the things.
Were we prepared?
Now, when it comes to the preparedness and maybe us having the capacity, at some point I don't see that our nation has that big capacity to host these events. But then it is trying, because there is a high financial burden as per now as I talk, because of this summit. And more so, there is also diversion of funds. The funds which were supposed to be running different projects, but I am sure they have been diverted due to this summit and all to cater for this summit. But I think we should not see less importance in this summit. As we earlier spoken, it has a lot of benefits, economic benefits, peace and security. Look at the infrastructure, look at the accommodation, tourism sector, and also a long cooperation and unity debate that we can go on and on and on. So the summit itself has benefits, though the financial burden is quite high. And I think as a nation, we have faced it, and maybe there will be other ways of jumping out of that hole. Looking at the picture some people are portraying for showing that this is our nation, I think it is really bad. I don't support it. At some point, I may condemn it, because we are having an international eye. People are all looking at us, and this is the picture we are sending to other people, to other nations, that maybe this is Uganda. When you plant matoke or whatever in the potholes, it does not show a good picture. Every nation has its problems, but the fact that we are having an international summit that is happening currently, I think these protests should not be happening, because they portray a bad image, and it really puts us on a low grade. And yes,
Mr. Kwantampora, let me first challenge him on that. So you are saying, as Ugandans, given our regrettable state of affairs, where we have a government that presides over us, that is notoriously known for human rights abuses, which muzzles, free expression of political opinion, has no respect for the rule of law, or even, independence of the judiciary. Every ethos and aspect of democracy you can think about, this is a government that doesn't respect it. So you're saying that simply because we have the expectation that we could bid or even host a big conference, Ugandans should now pretend everything is okay, and then we wait once these guests are gone, and then we can, resume our agitation. Because you come off as if you were saying, really, we should be very protective of our image. Do we have an image to protect?
It's like
in the first place?
Those days in your homes when your parents tell you, don't come when the vista is out.
You see, why? And I was going to use that example.
Yeah.
You see, in our family setting, I think for me it was okay then to say that, look, we have visitors, let's behave well, let's sweep, let's be different. Why that was important was that there was general consensus within the household that we need to build our reputation, that you know that it's being done in the interest of the homestead. And that analogy would have worked even for Uganda, to say, look, we have a conference, that one is valid if you have a country and the people moving the same, and they know that the reason why we have these potholes is that we don't have money, but our government is trying. Let us all be part of the solution. The problem is that we have a country where people know that the head of the family is not working for them. In fact, it's not that he's saying, look, let these people first go and we shall eat our beans. No, the beans are not there. They have been eaten already. You get my point? And so that it is not that we lack resources. It's not that, it is that this government is not working for them. You honestly cannot be in a country where you get more than 50% of your revenue for your economy, and there are potholes. I don't know if you're getting it. So I think if there's an opportunity to annoy the person who is eating your money, I think they are right. But also, what is the opportunity cost? The truth is that even if we smile, at the end of that day, there's nothing we're going to get apart from scandals of SUVs being taken, of money being misappropriated. We took a supplementary budget to finance NAM. If you want to know that we are not serious, there was a summit, I think, in Serbia where the president attended, and we said we are opening a coffee establishment in Serbia. There's a budget of about 5 million, 2 million in terms of setting up the area and all that. It turns out that we didn't spend that money on that outfit, that's the establishment in Serbia, that the host incurred his own costs. You ask yourself, where did that money go? That money was eaten. And it's the same people that are manning these so-called private sector foundation, PASID, this one, Presidential Rawogo's outfit. They are the same people. They are going to eat the money. And all for what? We smile over what? In expectation of what?
But also, I think in addition to that, when you look at in discussions on how the role of youth actually in demanding for good governance and in just generally facilitating social change in the societies that they live in, that certain times you need to be as shameless as possible in order to shock the system to the realities that you actually have.
Not shameful themselves.
Yes, because the system itself, the people in government are not shameful. They are very shameless. They are taking away tax, they're using taxpayers' money for their own benefits and doing all these other things. And so for us to now say that we need to act in a certain way, be prim and proper, you know, and all that, in order to make this very shameless government look good, it does not work for our interests. So as an activist, I would say that it was actually, I think it could have been strategic, especially if such things happened at the point when the dignitaries were even passing, right? That you see, for people to actually show the fact that, you see, we are so unhappy with the current situation that we are willing to take such steps, you know, at this particular moment, so that your eyes can be open to the plight of the people, so that you can actually be moved to do something and change the narrative that already exists. So I personally don't think that that should be a thing that we should frown upon. It should be something that efforts actually should be increased towards. But even apart from that, do you think that people don't know that Uganda have bad roads? We have been running the pothole exhibition for over a year now. And you know, as Lawel says, we are now a globalized village, that social media has come up. Everyone knows. People from the US have been seeing the pothole exhibitions. People know that Ugandans don't have these good roads. So what purpose does it then serve us for these people to come and see, oh, these guys were showing their potholes, but the roads are actually painted, they're actually clean and all that stuff. And then when they go back, it's going to rain, the paint is going to be washed off. We are back to the same things that we have actually been having. So I think that we shouldn't condone a state of bad governance just for the sake of looking good. Actually, we need to use every available avenue to make the people who are in power, people who are responsible for for the policies, for actually changing society, to open their eyes to the realities that are there, so that we can do something about it.
Yeah, but also, whose country is this? It's our country. I don't know, and I don't know if it's how all other countries behave, but I don't think it is okay for you to think that we are not supposed to be the primary beneficiaries
Absolutely.
of the products of our own taxes. We pay the taxes. You don't work on our roads, and then when the visitors are coming, you work on those roads, and then we are supposed to keep quiet. But also think that principally it is wrong. If, for example, a woman has been beating her husband, or a husband has been beating a woman, and when the in-laws come, you say, please don't express your displeasure. When smile as if everything is okay.
Yeah.
It's really not okay. How do we get redress? And maybe the people will not even give us redress, but what's the incentive of us smiling and laughing? For what? For you to again take our money, eat our money, not do the roads. So why should we smile? Because everything has incentive. So we smile, then when the thingy gets done, that's when you construct our roads. So I just don't get it.
Brideger, this was originally your question. We digressed, but what have you got to say?
No.
Do we have an image to defend as a country?
For me, what I have to say is that I think the people should have faith in the government, as much as I also condemn the bad roads and I don't agree with the potholes, and the government should work upon it. But the people should, in this time, they should keep calm, and maybe, as the minister said, they should keep smiling, but also they should also have faith in the government that it will work upon the roads.
This government that has continuously failed us.
They should have faith.
But honestly, how do you have a road to the industrial area looking like that? Even in the middle of the city.
I work just on Lugogo bypass. When I'm passing through Kololo, there's a time I actually decided to take a video of the roads. Kololo is like the place where the Kampala's elite stay. And the roads are so terrible, right? It's so, and you see, the thing is this, you know why I also think that we being pretentious does not help us, because you talked about the fact that this summit will help us to sign trade deals, get into joint venture agreements, and yes, I agree that that is possible. But you see, it's very detrimental for a person to be passing on the best roads, the most beautiful, sleeping in the most beautiful hotels and all that. They sign a deal with you, and then when they go back to their countries and come back in order now to start establishing projects, and see now a very different thing from what they actually saw at the time when this deal was being cut, right? Because they're going to come back, they're going to, not everything will probably will be done in Kampala. We have just talked about the energy sector and all that. So if they come back and see that the infrastructure is not good enough, the country, the forex exchange is not as good and everything, at the end of the day, they will take their business elsewhere. So it does not work for us to be pretentious. We need to handle matters as they are, improve our systems, improve our infrastructure, not just because there is a summit, but because that is how governments should be. And that is why we commend Rwanda. Even if Rwanda, we could say that maybe they are living in a very strict government, let me say that, right? But they have capacity to benefit from such summits, which we do not.
Lawel, as we close down the show, I'm starting with you. Do you think a summit like NAM, a conference of independent sovereign countries like NAM, should discuss a question of, let's say, Uganda's dismal human rights situation? It's a domestic issue, but you realize that in some of the objectives of NAM, there is the notion to respect human rights. And human rights, as we understand them, they are universal. So should NAM really consider such a question?
Should, will
as
they,
you give your parting shot.
Should and will they are different things. So should they? I think they should. I think that issues to do with human rights, every human being, by wherever they are in the world, should be able to say, look, these are human beings, they should be treated as so. And I don't think that's something we should really ask of the entity. I think that should be someone, even at individual level agency, we all should be able to say, let's push for that. It's just that I know for certainly that NAM is not going to do that, because they have successfully, and I don't want to call it propaganda, but they have sold the narrative that to demand for rights, to stand against dictatorship, is to be pro-West, or is to, these are Western values, and therefore anyone pushing for them is an ally of the other side. And I think that's a problem. We get lost in who is pro this, who is pro that. So because the West has had some had mistakes, not some mistakes. So the people like Museveni and the like find it easy to just throw away that entire conversation and like they wrap it in the whole entire Western rhetoric to shield themselves from individual liability or even questions of human rights. So should they? I think they should be able to do it, but I don't think they will do it. We're just going to get lost in the entire conversation of who is pro this, who is pro that. My parting shot is I hope that continuously that African countries can realize that we don't have to consistently choose who is going to be our slave master. The truth is every country or even continent is looking out for its interests. No one should lie to you that China Communist Party loves Africans more than it loves its own people or seeks to. It's just gray, just change in strategy, but the pursuit of dominance and interest continues. I hope that we don't continue to be hoodwinked. I hope that the young people like us can see through these things and say, look, because I believe that one of why we don't have that sustainability that Marcia was talking about is that we, even within our countries, we're not doing the bare minimums. We're not building the roads. We are stealing the money. We are prioritizing electro financing. We are having big administrative expenditure to sustain a huge administration framework. Those things don't allow us to grow ourselves in terms of getting economic autonomy and sustainability. And we are lied to that the biggest problem, it could be partly a problem, but it is the West or it is China. I think we need to work on our own individual capacities, and then we engage as a force, as an African force, Chinese force, BRICS force, Western force. We can't continue being like football players. Come, I have bought you, or I've sold you to this one. I don't think it is okay.
Thank you, Lawel, for your views. Mercy, on the question of whether the human rights issue should be relevant for the discussion, and your closing remarks.
It should be. It should be. In fact, actually, the Bandung principles, one of them is the issue of human rights and the respect of the rule of law. And I think it is something that can never lose relevance. We always have to agitate for the respect of human rights. And I think maybe that the question of a context-specific human rights framework would then be a good discussion, because the human rights instruments that have been handed over to us by the UN were things that were drafted by the colonial masters at the time, and over time they have still been the optional protocols and all these other legal instruments have also been done in a very Eurocentric manner. And so we have the African Charter, we have our very context-specific, the regional human rights framework, which needs to be implemented, it needs to be enforced. And as I said, it can never be an irrelevant discussion. My parting remarks, one, I think, and I like to say this, that everything is a governance issue. Everything is political. We need to first fix our governance systems, and then we can benefit from the summits that happen, and then we can actually even achieve economic liberation and all that. Because if you do not have an institution or a system in place that knows how to deal with the resources that the country has, then everything will still be squandered. It will not be sustainable. We can never achieve sustainable development if our government system is weak. So everyone needs to be actively involved in agitation for a better human rights system, a better governance system, a better respect for rule of law, because we cannot just keep moving around like still in that slave trade era where everything has to be, orders have to be handed over to us and all that. We cannot live like that. So I think that in our different ways, we need to contribute towards the governance system, and I think we can be headed in a better direction from there.
Thank you. That's a markedly optimistic view, quite different from Lawel's, but thank you for your perspectives. Mr. Brideger, what do you think the issue of human rights?
I think the issue of human rights is very crucial and very sensitive, and it is one of the core principles of NAM that human rights should be defended as much as they can. So if a country is surely against the human rights of the people, then it is on the wrong side of NAM as its movement. And of course, Uganda is part of the NAM, so it should at all times, they always defend the human rights of people, and of course take them as a very sensitive and serious issue. Then, in conclusion, NAM has been here for us, and there are a lot of benefits that some of them are tangible, some of them are not tangible, they are visible, some of them are not visible, but surely let us use it for the betterment of our nation, and hence move on smoothly. Thank you.
I want to appreciate you, ladies and gentlemen, for taking off time to join us for this conversation, and once again for your very insightful perspectives on a very serious issue that pertains to international geopolitical cooperation and interaction. To our esteemed viewership, we once again appreciate you for keeping us company up to the conclusion of this program. We want to appreciate the Center for Constitutional Governance for making the facilities possible to have this program. And you can engage us on our various social media platforms, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on X. To our production unit, we thank you and appreciating you for keeping us live on air. This is the Focus on Parliament show on Civic Space TV. We'll see you next time. Be blessed.